And I imagine that the contributors, I think Mpumalanga, and I think of the power stations that we have there, are a huge contributor to that.
That's the thing. There's more than one source that contributes to air pollution. One big challenge that South Africa has is we are quite reliant on coal, and specifically in areas in Mpumalanga, I think there's about 12 coal power stations. And there's been this emission or minimum emission standards that's been basically, there's been postponements from the Department of Environmental Affairs where they're saying that they only have to comply to a certain standard by 2020, and now it's 2025. And what some of these environmental justice groups have been saying is that it's concerning that they keep postponing these deadlines. But what the Environmental Department is saying is that you can't just change this overnight. It needs to be a transition, because we also need to think of development in the country. So we have to, it's going to be a transition to move away from coal-fired power stations in the country. But again, they say they understand that it is a problem. Another polluter, what we're talking about, is the fact that domestic fuels are being burned. But this is because South Africa faces poverty. So a lot of households still they do not have clean alternatives that they can use to cook food, to heat, to heating appliances in their houses. So they are, for example, dependent on burning coal within a small house. So that's quite a big concern. But again, if you think about that goes hand in hand with eradicating poverty in South Africa once again. But all the numbers and all basically the situations we are facing is really concerning. But from the Department of Environmental Affairs, it's clear they're saying that they do understand what's going on, but they can't seem to move fast.
But overall, I imagine that the issue of clean air then is not just confined to Mpumalanga. How are we doing as a country? Because when we speak about the cap that environmental groups have been fighting for in terms of these emissions, those have been ignored by and large across the country by the Environmental Affairs Department, especially when it comes to enforcement for those that are the most guilty.
Yeah. Well, the thing is they have identified high priority areas, whereas the Highveld is one, and that's where Mpumalanga falls into, and then the Vaal specifically. And that is where they have extra monitoring, extra awareness campaigns, and extra focus on those areas. But the thing is, at the end of the day, for example, in the Northern Cape, you don't have coal-fired stations, but they're saying the dust in this type of climate at the moment is also a concern. So obviously it varies from parts of the country, but what they're saying is we can't keep postponing these deadlines. But on the other hand, South Africa's economy is also dependent on these power stations. So unfortunately, we are in quite a difficult situation if you try and understand both sides.
Well, what does the Air Quality Information Management have to say about where to from here?
Well, they're saying that we have to make sure that we push extra resources and funds into this. We have to take it really seriously. They are calling for a massive or drastic policy shift. And we did hear from them, for example, they need to work with the mining department, minerals and the trade and industry department. They are very dependable on these power stations for power and for economic development. And they're saying that they've seen actually a less of a pushback from these departments, and they're trying to work together. For example, we've heard about this energy mix that South Africa is pursuing to make sure that we have kind of a 30%, if I have it correctly, clean power going into the energy mix, so we're not so reliant on the bad part of those. So it's going to be a collective effort. It's going to be extra push when it comes to funds, which is basically always the case in South Africa. And then when it comes to, for example, these domestic fuels that they burn, it's very important to create awareness around the fact that it is bad for your health to, in a small room, rely on coal to burn, to heat, or to cook food.
All right, fantastic. Let's take a listen to what Vumile Senene said to you earlier.
We have to transition. And this is the argument the department puts forward, to say that we must allow for transitioning, and hence the issue of the postponements, which is also a very hot topic. That's why the postponements were there in the first place, in the legal framework, to assist in this transition. So overall, the department is of the view that we are heading in the right direction. The amendments to the legislation now to finalize the transition period of the postponements is there. So everybody has certainty as to when the period comes to an end, because we felt that this particular provision was being abused. So we are approaching that point where everybody knows that beyond 2025, for those who are asking for postponement, and 2030 for those who are decommissioning, this transition must come to an end. And so this is the way that the department and hopefully as a sector, all of us will move to ensure that we come to an end in terms of the transition.
That was quite interesting that he mentioned that they do feel that at some point this was being abused. And this is again why they're saying that there seem to be these multiple postponements for these power stations to actually adhere to this minimum emissions standards. So even the department seems to be saying that enough is enough now. This is the final time. 2025, we need to be done with that transition, except if you want to decommission the stations, which I understand there's about 7 that will be decommissioned. That is by 2030.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Tom. Janke told me she was tracking that particular story for us.